What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you that you still think about to this day? Story 1. Maybe around age 14, early 90s. We were traveling from Texas up to Tacoma, Washington. We were about out of money, almost out of gas, no food, stuck in Chico, California. I sat in the car while my mom took my younger sisters to the restroom at a gas station. I was riddled with anxiety about our situation and looking down. The car door opened and I looked up. A lady who looked like a brown-haired Brady mom sat in the seat and faced me. She said, "It seems like you're down on your luck. Take this and give it to your mom. Tell her to pay it forward someday to someone who needs it." I looked down into my hand and there was a $100 bill. I looked up and she had disappeared. "Nowhere in the parking lot, just vanished," I cried. When my mom came back, I told her what happened and she cried. We got gas. There was a guy selling oranges on the side of the road, and we bought a bag and went to a local park that had a part of the river with a little spillway dam. We went swimming and ate oranges for a couple of hours before getting back on the road. I never saw the lady again, but she saved us, and we did make it up to Tacoma to start our new life. Thank you, kind stranger. We never forgot your generosity. Story 2. In college, I was roommates with my childhood best friend for about 2 years. We were very trusting with each other. We would go into each other's rooms freely and grab whatever we needed: clothes, a hairbrush, perfume, etc. No questions asked, just a knock if we were in the room to let each other know someone was entering. Our rooms were across the hall from each other, with the hallway facing the kitchen. So from the kitchen, you could see down the hall where our rooms were. At the time, my friend had very long black hair and very fair skin. One day I got home from work with my headphones in, talking to my mom about my day. I went into the kitchen to grab a snack. I saw my friend walk out of her room and go into mine, then leave my room and go back into hers. She looked like she had just gotten out of the shower. Her hair was soaking wet and she was wrapped in a white towel. Her long, black, wet hair is what I distinctly remember. Also, she made no eye contact with me, but I didn't think that was strange. I didn't say anything to her since borrowing each other's things was normal. I was still on the phone with my mom, so I didn't think much of it. I grabbed my snack, hung up with my mom, and went into my room to watch TV. I figured she was getting ready to go somewhere, and we'd talk later. About an hour passed, and I went to the kitchen to clean my plate. I saw her in the kitchen making something to eat and asked, "Hey, what did you grab from my room earlier? Did you find what you needed?" She looked at me like I was confused and said, "What are you talking about?" So I said, "Yeah, earlier when I got home, I saw you go into my room. Did you get what you needed?" Sorry, I didn't say hi. I was on the phone with my mom. She asked me if I was sure I saw her. I said yes, 100%. She told me to grab my phone and go to her car ASAP. She needed to show me something. I had my phone with me, and she grabbed my keys and her purse from the kitchen counter and dragged me out the front door and into her car. She told me she had gotten home maybe 5 minutes before we started talking. She had spent the night at her boyfriend's place and hadn't been home all day. So she had no idea who I saw. I'll never forget the look on her face when she told me this. Complete fear and panic. She called the police, and they arrived with the apartment manager. They searched the whole apartment and found no one. Nothing out of place. They spent a while checking every nook and cranny. The manager called maintenance to change our locks and gave us new keys that day. My friend then told me that for a week she'd been hearing noises from her bathroom, like bottles moving. But when she checked, she found nothing. I have no idea who I saw going in and out of our rooms, but it looked exactly like my friend. I don't drink or do drugs. I'm not on any medication. This happened in 2014, and I still get chills when I think about it. Story 3. Once I was hired to load firewood into my aunt's basement. She lives alone and had left the basement door open for me while she went out. I usually swing the interior basement door as wide as I can when I walk in, and the door almost never closes completely. But once I heard it close, and when I was about to grab another load, I saw that the deadbolt had locked. When I walk in, my arms are full of firewood, so I wouldn't be able to lock it myself. I looked out the window and checked the garage to see if she had come home, but she wasn't there. The door itself was enclosed, so there was no wind that could have shut it. I tried different ways of slamming the door to see if it would lock by itself, but nothing worked. It's an isolated house, so I would have heard someone drive up, and it's very unlikely that someone would have walked over just to lock the door and leave, especially timing it exactly while I was loading firewood. The steps are wooden, so I also would have heard someone walking down them. It's the only time I've ever seen a deadbolt lock itself in my life. Story 4. Just a normal Saturday night, I was watching TV home alone with my 2 dogs when I heard a banging sound coming from the basement. It legitimately sounded like somebody was hitting something against the appliances we had down there. Now, there's no access into the basement from outside, only through the upstairs rooms where I was, and I knew nobody could have come in and gotten past me. So, with this knowledge, I wasn't as scared as you might think. More curious about what the noise was. One of the 2 dogs, who is a bit of a tough guy and wants to confront everything, also heard the noise and bolted down into the basement to investigate. I went down and saw that it was my other dog banging his head into our dryer and chest freezer, which are next to each other. My tougher dog was just standing there watching, looking confused. So I approached my other dog and calmed him down, and we all went back upstairs. This really freaked me out and upset me, as it seemed like very strange behavior for my dog. Fast forward only 30 minutes or so, and the banging started again. I instantly looked over at my dog, but he was lying down, though also aware of the noise downstairs. We ran down into the basement, and now it was the tough one banging his head between the appliances. Again, I calmed him down, and we all went back upstairs. Nothing has ever happened again since that night. 3 years now. So that ruled out brain tumors, which is what I read online might cause dogs to bang their heads. But 2 dogs, suddenly on the same night, and it only affecting one of them at a time? 3 years later, and the 3 of us never talk about that night. Story 5. I was driving home from work on a long, somewhat dark road. I'll admit I was tired and cold and just wanted to get home. The speed limit was 60 miles per hour, and I was doing closer to 70. Suddenly, a girl with long blonde hair, a black coat with brown fur on the hood, and jeans appeared in front of my car. I knew there was another car to my left up ahead, but it was black, and all I saw was that it was stopped before I saw her. I managed to maneuver around her. I was freaked out, so I turned onto a side street and stopped to figure out what was happening. Then a tall guy with a black coat and short hair got out of the driver's side of the stopped car. He grabbed her, dragged her to the car while she was struggling, and put her back inside. I called the police and gave them a description of the car and the direction it took off in. I never heard anything about it, and I have not stopped thinking about her since. It's been 2 years. Story 6. My girlfriend and I are in a long-distance relationship. We typically take turns traveling between each other's countries, Australia and Canada. About 2 years ago, it was my turn to travel over to Australia to stay with her and her mom. For a bit of background, my girlfriend's room was built as an extension / add-on to their garage. So to get to it, you had to walk through their garage to reach her room. About a couple of weeks into my trip over there, I woke up at around 1 a.m., and the room was just glowing red. I looked up at the ceiling and saw this black figure crawling across it. It moved in such an inhuman way, almost like it was breaking every one of its bones to move. I started screaming, which woke my girlfriend up, and she looked up and started screaming as well. Instinctively, I grabbed my pillow and threw it at the figure. The next thing I knew, everything went black, and I was waking up a few hours later. My girlfriend was fast asleep, so I thought it was just some weird dream. At that point, I needed to use the washroom, so I walked through the garage and tried to quietly open the garage door to get into the main house. Previously, her mom had mentioned that she was annoyed with us staying up late and going through the garage door at night. Since her room was down the garage hallway, opening the door would click loudly and wake her up. So I'm standing there at the garage door trying to open it as quietly as possible. As I turned the handle and the door clicked open, her mom started screaming at the top of her lungs. I thought it was out of anger for waking her up, so I immediately closed the door and speed walked back to my girlfriend's room. I climbed into bed and gently nudged her awake to tell her mom was yelling. She got up to check on her. About 20 minutes later, my girlfriend came back completely silent. She asked if I saw the red glow and figure in the ceiling. I said yes, and she went wide-eyed and said she thought it was a dream too. Then she said her mom wasn't yelling at me. Apparently, when I opened the door, it did wake her up. But she saw a black figure standing at the foot of her bed, slowly moving toward her. She then experienced a blackout and was woken up by my girlfriend. Yeah, the entire house slept with the lights on for a month after that. Story 7. I had a schnauzer that could hear a cat stalk across a Persian rug. The slightest noise could wake her from a slumber and set off her constant barking. She made a great tent companion while on backpacking trips. Bears, raccoons, and skunks would all get fair warning if they came within range of our campsite. One morning, we woke up from a night without interruptions in the backcountry of southwest Colorado, and I found my tent's central guy line was no longer staked down by the aluminum stake I had used, but instead by a piece of aspen branch carved into what looked like a tiki statue. Nothing too ornate, but a snarling face with teeth had been carved into the bark, and it had obviously been heated in a fire to give it a brown color. My dog didn't make a sound, and I apparently slept harder than I thought. I scrambled out of the tent and looked around the small alpine lake, but saw no other campers, nor any sign that people had been around. I cut my trip short and hiked the 8 miles back to my car. Not a single other car was in the lot at the trailhead. Story 8. Well, not the scariest thing ever. But when I was 11, my family and I moved to another town because of my dad's job. We were only going to stay there for a year, and thankfully we were given a house in a closed community of about 20 houses made for Army officials and their families. So one day my parents are out, and they take my baby sister, my older sister is at a friend's house, and I'm left alone with our dog for like 2 hours. I was playing in my room when I remembered that the black socks from my Monday uniform, kind of like a suit you wear on Mondays, were drying in the backyard. I went out there with my dog and uttered out loud, "I wish there was something to do." And not a moment later, I heard a young voice say very clearly, "Then let's play." I turned around to see my normally hyperactive Golden sitting and looking at me like nothing had happened. I freaked out immediately and ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom. I turned on the TV and hid under the covers until my family arrived. They saw me sweating, scared, and paranoid at that point. They never figured out what happened but tried to make me feel better. Now, the part that freaks me out is that each of the houses in the community was surrounded by 3-meter-tall cinder block walls. The place where my socks were was next to a wall separating us from another house, one that had no children. The other house to the left was over 20 meters away and behind another wall, and the wall behind my house separated us from nothing but a steep hill. There was no one who could have said that, and to this day it freaks me out every time I think of it. Story 9. When I was in high school, I would always be the first to arrive home out of my family, having the entire house to myself. I've never been superstitious or someone who scares easily, and the hour I had alone was my favorite time of the entire day. My bedroom is upstairs, and one day when I got home from school, I placed my bag away and started up the stairs. About halfway up, I stopped because I thought I heard something coming from upstairs, so I stayed and listened. I heard a very slow rendition of the melody from Ring Around the Rosie, crystal clear, coming from my bedroom. I was 100% sure I was the only one home, and I had absolutely no device that could be playing music unprompted, especially that song. I froze in fear and listened for about 15 seconds to make sure I was really hearing it, which I was. I just turned back down the steps and waited around in the living room for my family to get home before I went back upstairs. I went into my room a few hours later, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. I know it's not a very climactic story, but it's something I think about every now and then. I never told anyone about it because, why would I? But that was the first time something truly strange happened to me. Story 10. We had a rescue dog years back, a terrier mix. We lived in the countryside on a wooded hillside and owned about 5 acres of woodland and rough fields, mostly wild. This dog loved to be up there chasing rabbits, but loved her home too, so she would never be gone for very long. One day she went missing. We took our other dogs up there and searched thoroughly. Nothing. We had another friend bring his dogs, nothing. We advertised, put up posters. We did little but search high and low for 6 days, but still nothing. On the 6th day, we had pretty much given up hope. But I decided to go up one last time because I had a hunch, a tickle in my belly, about one particular area which had already been thoroughly searched. I took a sickle and a pair of gardening gloves and hacked my way toward the center of a huge bramble patch. It was summer, and all I could hear was birdsong and insects. But suddenly I heard a muffled yip. I called her name and then heard her again, getting excited. She was deep underground in a rabbit warren. I stayed calling to her until help arrived. The local fire brigade were kind enough to come and help and advise, and we got her out eventually. She ran around like a demented muddy pup, and amazingly, the vet said she was basically okay, had probably been getting enough moisture from eating mud to keep her alive. I am not generally a fanciful person, but I just knew in my gut she was there. No explanation for it. Story 11. We used to have a night out every Christmas with the lads from high school. We went back to one of the guys' houses and were all just hanging out, having a good time, when one of them pointed into the kitchen and said, "Who's that?" The kitchen was like a box room. You could see the whole room from the doorway. I had my back to the wall next to it and turned to look. The lights were off and there was no one there. We all looked and asked what he was talking about. He was completely serious and just stayed there pointing, saying, "No, who are those two people there?" The guy whose house it was looked into the kitchen, turned on the light, and again, no one. We asked if he was okay, asking what he meant. He said, "Look, that man is leaning on the counter and the other one is pointing and laughing at me." We kept saying there was no one there. After going back and forth for about 10 minutes, he started describing what they were wearing, how they were standing. Then it clicked for the guy whose house it was. He said the descriptions matched exactly how his uncle and granddad used to stand and what they used to wear. Both had passed away years ago. Our friend then realized we couldn't see them and began to panic, tearing up and shaking. He was so overwhelmed we had to help him put his shoes on to leave. After he left, and being a bit tipsy, but no substances we knew of, we just laughed it off as something weird. But the house owner said again, the way he described them was too accurate. I wouldn't have believed it if I wasn't there. Honestly, I still think it might have been some strange mental moment he had. We all knew his granddad and uncle before they passed, so maybe it was just buried memories. To this day, anytime we bring it up, he refuses to talk about it at all. Like I said, it sounds far-fetched, but that's 100% true. I don't believe in ghosts, and I still think it was just some kind of moment, but it was genuinely strange and unsettling. Story 12. A friend and I from high school used to go out to this old county road and sit on a big hill facing a large, old brick house across the street that sat in a wide open field. The front of the house had 2 rows of 6 windows each, all facing the road. One night we were relaxing on the hill and watching the sunset when, out of nowhere, a light turned on in one of the windows and then shut off. Then another random window lit up, then shut off. It kept going. Faster, faster. A window would light up and then immediately go dark, only for another to flicker on. It went on for about a minute, and the speed just kept increasing. At a certain point, it was flashing so quickly and randomly that there was no way a person could be going room to room doing that, or even have access to multiple light switches simultaneously. After speeding up and flashing around randomly for about a minute, it just stopped. It made absolutely no sense. We both saw it. We've talked about it many times since then. The only thing we could guess is that maybe the homeowner had some kind of automated lighting system set up to control all the rooms and was playing a prank. Other than that, I honestly have no explanation. Story 13. A few years ago, I was at my lowest point in life. Several people close to me had passed away unexpectedly. I was being bullied every day at my job, and my life was falling apart. I wasn't just depressed. I couldn't imagine waking up another day. So, I planned my suic. I bought a one-way plane ticket, got sleeping pills, and wrote a series of letters. On the day I was supposed to fly out and carry out my plan, there was a terrible accident on the freeway to the airport. It was shut down in both directions. I pulled into a nearby pub to wait out the traffic and grabbed a drink. As soon as I sat on the patio, a man asked if he could sit with me. I didn't care. I said sure. He looked at me and said that whatever I was about to do was a terrible idea and I'd regret it. I thought, who is this random guy? But I listened. He said he could tell I was in pain, but that I had a meaningful life ahead of me, and this wasn't how my story should end. I hadn't said a word about my plan. He asked me to hand him my keys and wallet. He said he'd give them back after we talked. So I opened up to this complete stranger. I told him everything, what I'd been through, why I was headed to the airport to end my life in a cemetery across the country where my family was buried. He listened the entire time. Then he asked me to pull out the letters, and we burned them together. He told me I was valuable to the world, and that after I finished my drink, I needed to go home and get some rest. He told me I was going to be okay tomorrow, and I believed him. He gave me back my wallet and keys. I went home that afternoon, hugged my family, got some sleep, and the next day I started putting my life back together. I found a therapist, got a new job. Years later, I'm in an incredible place, so far from where I was that day. No one in my life knows how close I came to ending everything. But that stranger somehow understood. He saved my life. I never saw him again. Don't even know his name. It's the most mysterious and meaningful thing that's ever happened to me, and I think about him every single day. Thank you, kind stranger, for saving me that random September day on a pub patio. Story 14. I used to work in a nursing home where I cared for dementia patients. Every patient on the hall I worked on would steal spoons from dinner to give to the kids because they like shiny things. It got to the point where once a week I'd have to go through everyone's room to take back the spoons. I asked the patients about the kids many times but never got a good answer. I'd hear things like, "They just live here," or "They stand outside in the snow and look in the windows," or "They're my friends who visit." It wouldn't be so weird if they all didn't do it, but it was everyone. The ones who were still capable of speaking anyway. One time at 3 a.m., one of my patients started screaming, so I ran into her room and found her lying in bed, seemingly fine. I asked what was wrong and she said, "That boy is here again and won't get out of my closet. I'm scared." Like, me too, Dolores. What on earth? Story 15. When I was in 3rd grade, I moved to a new town and into a new house. We lived in a camper in the backyard of the house while we renovated it. It was a pretty old house. During renovation, we found all sorts of stuff in the walls. Old bottles, a pair of glasses, letters, newspapers, old pictures of children in school clothes. It was a 2-story house and the stairs were kind of a focal point for all sorts of creepy stuff. Once you got to the top of the stairs, there was a little landing before it went into 2 bedrooms. At night, we would always leave the light on in the landing in case we had to get up to use the bathroom. Me and one brother shared a room, and the other room was for our older brother. I refused to sleep upstairs due to how creeped out I was, so I always slept downstairs on the couch. One weekend, my sister, who is older than both my brothers, came to visit and was in my oldest brother's bedroom alone, as we were all at school and my mom was at work. As she was sitting up there watching TV, she heard footsteps coming up the stairs and called out, thinking my mom was home early. No response, other than the footsteps turning around and heading back down the stairs. When she got up to look, there was no one home, and all doors were locked. It doesn't stop there. My oldest brother was left home alone for a week, while me, my other brother, and our parents went on vacation. Naturally, he had his girlfriend over for a few nights to keep him company. One night, she got up to use the bathroom around 3 a.m. and went downstairs where she said she heard children whispering. A couple of nights later, around 3 to 4 a.m., she woke my brother, saying someone was in the house. They heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Since the landing light was on, they could see a shadow under the door, like someone was standing there. The doorknob began to shake, but luckily it was locked. They both started freaking out. My brother jumped out of bed. We had some display samurai-type swords, not sharp, and he grabbed one and went toward the door. They heard more footsteps running down the stairs and he followed, only to find an empty house. All windows and doors were locked. He called the police, but nothing came of it. Story 16. Back in around 2008, I lived near my college in an apartment. My apartment was set back from the main road quite a bit and was in a wooded and hilly area. One night, I was out running near sundown. I was at the bottom of a hill behind my apartment, near the end of my run. I looked up ahead to the top of the hill and noticed 3 guys on bikes just sitting there. Being a 20-year-old woman, my instincts started to kick in. I told myself I was probably overthinking and that everything would be fine, so I kept running. I was about halfway up the hill. The 3 guys were still just sitting there, facing in my direction. I didn't have a phone or any way to call for help, and there was nowhere else to go. I told myself I'd just run as hard as I could and scream if I needed to. Suddenly, I heard something coming up beside me. I looked to my right and saw a German Shepherd. He was running alongside me. I had never seen this dog before in my life. I can't explain it, but I just knew I was going to be okay. I kept running up the hill with this random dog next to me. As we approached the guys, the dog moved slightly ahead of me and then directly in front of me. He reached the top of the hill and stopped in his tracks. I kept running and passed the guys without making eye contact. Once I passed them, the dog caught up and continued running beside me. He stayed with me until I reached my apartment's very well-lit parking lot. Then, just like that, he disappeared into the trees as quickly as he had appeared. I took that route at the same time every single day for weeks and drove that road often, hoping to see him again, but I never did. My friends are convinced he was some sort of guardian angel making sure I stayed safe. I don't really know what to believe, but it's the creepiest, most bizarre, and amazing thing that's ever happened to me. Story 17. A few years ago, I took my dog out for a walk at night. The apartment complex I lived in at the time had enough light outside, so I was never scared of going out for a little walk. One night, as I walked down the stairs, I noticed a large brown furry thing under the stairs. I know for a fact there were 3 thin bushes under those stairs, but that night, whatever that thing was, it was in between those bushes. I was too afraid to inspect it, so I walked the dog around the neighborhood for 5 minutes. When I got back, the large brown thing was gone. I stood there for a second before gathering up the courage to go up the stairs. My dog, however, refused to go up. I scooped him up and ran up the stairs into the comfort of my own home. A few days later, I sat in the living room minding my own business. From the corner of my eye, I saw something brown and furry crawl from the ceiling into my room. That night, I had a dream I was being attacked by an unknown creature. I covered myself in my blanket, and it scratched and tore at it, yelling at me. I got angry and launched myself at it, punching and scratching at a large brown furry figure. When I woke up, my dog was there watching me and whining. I don't even know what to think this was. Story 18. I am a skeptic about ghosts and otherworldly beings. This event that happened causes me some concern because it doesn't make any sense, and I cannot explain what was happening. When I was in middle school, my family went camping in New Mexico. We were at a campsite near a lovely stream. My parents had one tent, and my brother and I had another. As I was settling down to sleep for the night, I was listening to my headphones. I decided it was time to go to sleep, so I took my headphones off and was dozing off when I became hyper-aware of a sound. It was a slight swishing, scratching sound on the side of the tent. I just assumed there was a breeze and a stalk of grass brushing on the tent. But suddenly I realized there was no wind whatsoever. I asked my brother, "Jay, what is that?" He asked what I meant. I pointed out the scratching noise. He hit the side of the tent with his hand. In response, whatever it was, hit the side of the tent from outside. We both immediately started screaming. My parents came running, and all the while the scratching continued. They said it was probably just a bug, a tent string, or some vegetation, and they got a flashlight to check. There was nothing. They brushed down the exterior, shook the tent, and even took everything out to check. The noise still continued. I was completely shaken, so I slept in my parents' tent, and my dad slept in ours. My brother and father said the scratching continued all night. Still puzzled and creeped out by that experience. Story 19. Driving home from work late one night, I was followed. And it was weird. I left the hospital and turned off the main road onto a bunch of side streets I normally took. At one point, I noticed a car behind me that made the same left turn I did. They sped up to get right behind me. I thought nothing of it. Then I briefly considered going to 7-Eleven to grab some food and turned on my right signal. But I realized I had food at home, so I turned the signal off. The car behind me turned on their right signal and then turned it off too, exactly as I had. At that point, I got a bit spooked. I turned my right signal on again, and they did too. But at the next intersection, I turned left instead, even though my right signal was still on. They followed me and turned left as well. They kept following me through a series of odd turns. Eventually, I turned onto a cul-de-sac I knew about, figuring I could turn around there and try to see who it was. As I approached the end of the road, they seemed to realize what I was doing. They stopped, made a fast turn, and sped off. It was strange. I still don't know who it was. Story 20. A couple of things happened to me and my housemate when we moved into the top apartment in an old building in Europe, right next to a forest known for folklore involving witchcraft. The locals even have a witches' parade every year. It's meant to be just a bit of fun. The apartment was huge. 3 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, a study, 2 living rooms, a living space, a kitchen, 2 balconies. The larger balcony was upstairs across from a door to the attic that ran across the entire building. It was dark and full of a lot of old stuff, porcelain, century-old wooden furniture, and a doll neither of us wanted to touch. There were also some children's slippers and black and white photos of a child from when the town still used ox-drawn carts. It was a wonderful place to live, and the cheap rent made it even better. But both of us were mildly creeped out at first. We used to hear sounds in our rooms, banging, footsteps, or like something falling on the carpet. My housemate would text, "Did you hear that too?" But she eventually stopped. She didn't want to talk about it anymore. I guess she didn't want to give it power. I clearly remember the first time she was out. It was winter, so it got dark early. I needed to grab groceries, so I left all the lights on to make myself feel better. I couldn't find my earphones, so I left without them. When I came back, every single light was turned off, except the one in my room. My earphones were neatly rolled and placed on my bed. Other things happened too. Light bulbs in the corridor popped and died one by one, only in that hallway. My housemate once heard something scratching at her door and texted me, thinking it was me. I was at a friend's place. I once heard a door loudly slam somewhere in the house while I was in the bathroom. As soon as I flushed, it stopped, as if whatever it was didn't realize someone was home. The apartment was always strangely cold. We lived there for a year without anything extreme happening, but it always felt off. Story 21. IWF 27 was training to be a nurse. Here in Germany, you have to visit and practice at a lot of places. I was working at a hospice, a place where terminally ill patients can stay until their last day. I was there for 8 weeks and was in my last year of studying. I was doing a round, checking on everyone, making sure they were not in pain, needed help, or just wanted to talk. One patient, a woman who had been there for a few days, started breathing differently, and I called her husband, who was in the common room, not sure how else to describe it. She took her final breaths while her husband held her hand. It was peaceful, and I knew she was gone. At that moment, another patient made a call. We had phones that rang when someone requested a nurse. I excused myself and left her room. I took a deep breath and went to the patient who had called. I entered and smiled. "How can I help you?" The man told me his guest would like to know where the exit was. I was a little confused because he hadn't had any visitors that day. So I asked, "Who do you mean?" Maybe I just hadn't seen someone, since I had been with the dying patient for over half an hour. He answered, "Well, this lady here, she wants to know where she could get out." I went pale, my blood felt like it dropped to my feet. I was shocked. I stuttered while opening the window. Here is the way to the balcony, and then right to left, down the stairs is the door. I'll get you some water." I left the room and could barely breathe, leaning against the wall. I stood there for about 5 minutes. One of the nurses saw me and asked if I was okay. I told her what had just happened. She smiled and simply said, "Yes, that kind of thing happens a lot here." A few hours later, I asked the man if his guest had found the way out. He said, "Yes, she did," and said thank you for everything. I had to process that for days, weeks, months. I still can't believe it. But since then, I am sure that we carry a soul. Also, some other strange things happened to me and my colleagues while working in the ICU. Story 22. A lot of weird stuff has happened to me in my life. So either I'm followed by some trickster energy, or strange things just tend to happen naturally around me, and I'm too clueless to understand what's going on. I've chosen 3 experiences that I absolutely can't explain, and I had other people there to witness them. The first story takes place at a friend's apartment around 15 years ago. We were watching TV and chatting when the topic of ghosts came up for some reason. I said I believed there was something more in this world that we still didn't fully understand. She just laughed and said she never believed in that kind of thing and never would. She then jokingly shouted for the ghosts in the room to show themselves just to mess with me. She waited, smirking, for a few seconds. Then we heard what sounded like a heartbeat, rhythmic thumping. We looked around and immediately found the source. It was my purse. It was lying on the table in front of us, pulsating like a heart. I grabbed it and emptied it out, but we couldn't find anything that could have caused that strange heartbeat. The second story took place around the same time, but at another friend's house. He had told me before that he often heard footsteps in his living room, but I figured it was probably just creaky floors or pipes, since it was an old house. One night my sister and I were visiting, and we heard them too. Clear as day, heavy boot-like footsteps coming from the kitchen into the living room, stopping right in front of the couch we were sitting on. The last story happened to me and my dad when I was living with him and my sister. One evening we were in the living room watching a movie. My sister was in her room studying. From where we sat, you could see the hallway to the left. It began at my sister's room, passed by the living room and the other rooms, and ended at the office where the family computer was. Both my dad and I saw my sister walk from her room to the office. We looked at her. 2 minutes later, we saw her again, walking the exact same path. My dad and I looked at each other, and he pointed out how strange it was that we never saw her walk back. He said if he saw her again, he'd ask her what was going on. Sure enough, a few minutes later, she walked that way again, from her room to the office. My dad called out and asked if she was in the office. She walked out of her room and said no. Why was he asking? We have no idea who or what we saw walking that hallway over and over. My dad still considers it the strangest thing he's ever experienced. Story 23. I was delivering newspapers on my paper route when a longtime customer pulled his car up next to me and asked if I could just give him his daily newspaper now because he was going on a long trip. I handed him his newspaper and then skipped his house as I continued my route. The next day, I was collecting the weekly fees. Back then, you had to go collect the money yourself. No internet payments yet. And I went to his house to collect. His wife answered and promptly complained that I had missed their house the day before. I explained to her that her husband had pulled up next to me, told me he was going on a trip, and that I gave him the paper. She started crying. She told me her husband had passed away a couple of weeks ago, and it wasn't possible I had spoken to him the day before. I know what I saw, and nearly 30 years later, I still think about that moment. I have no way to logically explain what happened, and it still gives me chills. Story 24. When I was a kid, I lived in this tiny 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and sister. For whatever reason, I used to sleep on the couch in the living room, wake up at 3 a.m. to watch anime while I got ready for school, and then go back to sleep for a few more hours. I honestly don't remember why I used to do this. Anyway, one night I was awake, it was probably around 2 or 3 a.m., and all of a sudden someone started banging on the window and screaming. I mean, hysterically. It scared me so badly. This went on for a good couple of minutes before it just stopped. The weirdest part was that it didn't wake up my mom, my sister, or even the neighbors. And when I asked them the next day if they heard anything, they all told me no. Maybe it was just my imagination or someone having a breakdown outside, but I'll never know. Another incident happened when I was in middle school and we lived in a house out in the middle of nowhere. It was a weekend and I was sleeping in, like usual. My parents hated that and always tried to wake me up. So when I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Wake up," I assumed it was my mom. But when I opened my eyes, no one was there. Not in the room, not anywhere. I figured maybe someone had come in a few minutes ago, and I was just waking up late. I asked my parents if they had tried to wake me that morning. They both said no. To this day, I'm not sure if I imagined it or what, but it still freaks me out. Story 25. I was about 7 or 8 and at a housewarming party at my aunt and uncle's new place. It wasn't fancy, just a modest mobile home in South Carolina. The party was low-key, family, some barbecue in the backyard, red Solo cups, and boxes still in the garage. Nothing was fully unpacked yet, just the furniture placed where it needed to be. 2 of my cousins were there, and one of them had a friend over. We were all playing together, some made-up fantasy game pretending to be princesses or something. All the adults were out back drinking, so the only ones inside the house were me, my 2 cousins, and their friend. The house was laid out with the kitchen at the front door, then the living room, and then a hallway leading to the bedrooms and bathroom. I was in the living room sitting on the couch, which we had decided was the princess's bedroom, while the others were getting snacks. With no warning or other sound, every single one of us heard a female voice let out an ear-piercing, gut-wrenching scream from the bathroom. It was so loud and so sudden that it made me jump. My cousins and their friend came running out of the kitchen and stared at me, sitting alone. Then we all ran into the bathroom, but no one was there. Nothing was out of place, but there wasn't much to move anyway, just the toilet paper roll. We turned around and saw 3 adults coming inside from the backyard. They had heard the scream too and thought it came from inside. That's when it got really weird. Over the years, we've talked about it. Maybe it was a prank no one admitted to, but in order for it to have been someone real, they would have had to sneak into the bathroom without me seeing, scream, and then get out either through the back door, which we would have seen, or a locked bedroom window. But all the windows were locked from the inside. My uncle even checked for hidden speakers, but found nothing. To this day, we're torn. The kids think it was something supernatural or maybe a prank by the adults. The adults think one of us kids did it and lied about it. But none of us were in the bathroom when they came in. and the scream was something none of us could ever reproduce. It was chilling. The mood at the party was completely ruined after that. Everyone was unsettled and no one had that "I got you" look that would come after a successful prank. It was genuinely disturbing. Story 26. I don't think I have ever talked about this to anyone because it still hurts to think about it, but I really wanted to share it here. Also, this is quite a long one. I had this neighbor who was around 30, and he was such a kind person. Let's say his name was Adam. I felt like he was the kind of older brother I had always wished for. He was an all-rounder, into fitness, good at singing and playing every instrument, dancing, sports, cooking, everything. He used to take me and my younger brother to the beach whenever he could. This incident took place 3 days before my 14th birthday. I was on my way to school in the morning when an absurd scene flashed in front of my eyes. It was him getting into an accident and dying. It felt so real I almost wanted to cry. But then I told myself maybe it was because I had watched a movie with a character dying the night before. I continued with my day. Around 8 p.m., my parents got a phone call. I could see their expressions change as they spoke. After the call ended, they said they needed to go somewhere and would be back in a while. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I had a bad feeling. The next morning, I woke up to the worst news of my life. Adam had passed away. Apparently, he had a major accident the night before and died on the spot. I didn't know how to react, especially because a few hours earlier, I had a bad feeling about him. For days, I couldn't sleep. I blamed myself, thinking maybe if I had warned him, he might still be alive. It's been almost 7 years since it happened, but every time I think about it, my heart aches. I still wish he were alive. I can't explain why I had that feeling hours before it happened, and that's what scares me. Story 27. So my brother, myself, and our friend were driving through Vermont, heading to a cabin to go snowboarding for the week. I was sitting in the passenger seat of my brother's car when I noticed a bright red light. It was nighttime in the sky. It was coming from deep in the woods but was shining in a huge dome shape. The light seemed to be restricted to the dome. It didn't spread far, but it was very bright. We were so baffled that we pulled over at a small gas station nearby to get a better look. There were about 6 other people there who seemed to live nearby, and they were also looking at the light. They told us there were no buildings or factories out there whatsoever. As our conversation continued, the light started to dim. Then, almost like it imploded on itself, it suddenly burst out into a huge white light that lit up the sky and surrounding area. About 10 seconds after the change, a huge gust of wind came at us from the direction of the light. I'd estimate it was about 15 to 25 miles per hour winds. I hike and was comparing it to what I've experienced on mountains. Then the light began to fade again, slowly. We hopped in our cars and continued driving. The light didn't completely disappear for another 10 minutes. Story 28. I lived on a 600-acre farm in Arkansas with absolutely no one around for miles and miles. One night I got home late and went out to feed the animals. I had just finished and was taking the buckets back to the barn when, as I was locking up, our herding dog, a corgi, started going absolutely wild and ran into the woods. I immediately went to check to make sure the animals would be safe. I had a handheld spotlight and was shining it into the trees, but I saw nothing at first. The dog kept barking and darting between the trees. Then I finally saw it, something like a black splotch. It was somewhat humanoid in shape, and the weird part was that it absorbed the light. I've never seen anything like it. The closest comparison would be how opaque stone doesn't reflect light, but kind of nullifies it. Suddenly, the dog was thrown, literally launched over my head and over the electric fence, which stood more than 6 feet tall and was at least 9 feet behind me. I absolutely bolted back to the house to grab the shotgun. When I came back, the dogs were still barking, but the thing was gone. I fired the shotgun into the woods to scare whatever it was away. It seemed to work, and we never saw it again that night. All the dogs returned to the house. I fed and watered them, gave them all the good boy treatment for protecting the animals. Now here's the part that made it incredibly difficult to deal with and truly upset me. The next day, that specific dog, the one who had chased whatever it was found dead at the edge of the woods with its neck completely snapped backward. I was so shocked and heartbroken that I didn't process it properly at the time. To this day, I have no idea what that thing was, and thinking about it still makes me sick to my stomach. Story 29. I was at my best friend's birthday party. She was celebrating her 18th birthday at her big brother's house, who let us use it for the night. We're Muslim, so there was no alcohol or weed or anything like that. There were about 10 of us. The party started at 11 p.m. Around 3 a.m., one of my friends asked to go to sleep because he wasn't feeling well. My friend told him to use one of the bedrooms and showed him which one. He came back almost immediately and said he couldn't sleep in there because there was already a baby sleeping in the bed. We were all confused. None of us were parents, and neither was my friend's brother. So we all decided to go check. And sure enough, there was a baby. My best friend, the birthday girl, tried to wake the baby by gently touching him, but it didn't work. We were all scared but decided to leave him alone for the time being. We went back to the living room, trying to figure out how a baby had gotten there. We called my friend's brother and tried to make sense of it all. About 30 minutes later, the baby suddenly started crying. I have never been so scared in my life. All of us rushed back into the bedroom to try to calm him down. We ended up feeding him, and he fell asleep again after about 30 minutes. We returned to the living room. Around 5 a.m., we started cleaning the house. That's when one of my friends suddenly screamed, "Where's the baby?" We all stopped what we were doing and ran back into the bedroom. The baby was gone. Just gone, like he had never even been there. My best friend turned 23 last December, and to this day, none of us knows where that baby came from. Story 30. For the first year and a half of college, I worked the evening shift, 3 to 11, at a small-town hotel managed by my best friend's mom. The laundry room was connected to the main office, and since it opened into the middle of the hallway, we often used it as a shortcut when checking on rooms. By 8 p.m., everyone else left, and the evening shift worked alone. It was usually quiet because most guests were long-term business travelers. On my first night working solo, a housekeeper teased me about a ghost that haunted the hotel. I laughed it off. Later that night, I was using the laundry room as a shortcut. I was halfway through when all of the washers and dryers suddenly turned on at once. I bolted out of there. I never told anyone and convinced myself maybe they were on timers or something. Nothing else strange happened until a year and a half later, on my last day working there. Earlier that week, a guest made me uncomfortable. He had quietly returned a plunger by sneaking into the laundry room, walking into the back office, and just placing it in the middle of the room without saying a word. Because of that, I kept the laundry room door shut. During my last hour on the job, I suddenly heard what sounded like 3 drunk men arguing in the laundry room. I also heard the clinking of beer bottles, but couldn't understand what they were saying. I called my best friend, who worked the night shift and was the manager's son. He could hear the voices too, through the phone. Even though I knew it wasn't smart, I opened the door to tell them to quiet down. As soon as I opened the door, the voices stopped. The room was completely empty. I brushed it off, but it was strange that my first and last shifts were both marked by something I still can't explain. Story 31. I'm using a throwaway because we don't know what people close to us would think. This is the first time we've talked about this with anyone other than each other. I've read a few stories here and hope ours fits too. First, neither my husband nor I use drugs, suffer from mental illness, or abuse alcohol. We drink occasionally, but we hadn't that night. It happened about 8 months ago. We lived in a small apartment with our 2 young children and our dog while saving up for a house. It was a typical Monday evening around 7 p.m. We had just cleaned up after dinner. My husband was browsing the internet while I relaxed on the couch. I was reading the back of a cake mix box, trying to decide if I had time to bake it, let it cool, frost it, and enjoy some before bed. He was watching a video and said something funny. We both laughed. Then bam! I woke up face down in bed. My clock read 8 o'clock exactly. My alarm wasn't on. I felt confused and noticed a strong scent of coconut. I sat up and looked at my husband. He was also just waking up, just as confused. We both jumped up and ran to the kids' room. They were asleep in bed. We went into the living room, and the second our dog saw us, she started whimpering and army crawling toward us. I had never seen her act like that before, or since. Nothing looked out of place in the apartment except one strange detail. The cake mix I had been holding, gone. I searched everywhere for it. We never found it. Another odd thing was that we were all dressed in pajamas, except our youngest. He was still in his jeans and t-shirt from earlier. Neither of us would have put him to bed dressed like that, and we had no memory of changing clothes ourselves either. We were already late for work, but both called in sick. We spent the entire day trying to make sense of what had happened. At one point, my husband asked if I smelled coconut when I woke up. I had. We never found the source. And to this day, I can't look at a cake mix box or smell coconut without getting anxious or nauseous. Story 32. This didn't exactly happen to me, but I experienced some strange aftermath from it. My best friend and his mom were moving out of their house. They were the only ones living there, and he decided to take one last selfie in his room. When he showed the picture to his mom, she asked, "Who is that?" Upon closer inspection, he noticed a white face, almost like a mask, looking over his shoulder from the attic hatch above his room. He had always heard strange noises from the attic, but had never seen anything. A few weeks later, we went on a wrestling trip and stayed in a hotel. He showed the picture to everyone in our room. After that, strange things started happening. We heard knocks on our hotel room door, but no one was there. We also began seeing flashes or glimpses of a figure in the room's mirror. Everyone was spooked and thought it might be connected to the figure in the picture. My friend became so paranoid that he started playing Bible verses on his phone all night to keep anything away. He said that ever since he took that picture, weird things have kept happening to him. Story 33. A few years ago, I tried a synthetic version of a popular substance. It was extremely strong, and I couldn't handle it. I took 2 small puffs, passed it on to the next person, then leaned against the wall and slid down it. I started getting sick. I felt like I was dying. Pure dysphoria, the complete opposite of how that kind of thing is supposed to make you feel. Everyone around me was frustrated that I was getting sick in the house, so I crawled outside and continued throwing up. While I was still fully conscious near the end of being sick, I fell over in it and looked up. I saw a shadowy figure surrounding me. I knew what I was seeing probably wasn't real, but it didn't feel like any other hallucination I had ever experienced. It felt like the afterlife was waiting for me. I never want to feel that again. I would sincerely and literally rather face anything else than go through that again. Since that day, I've mostly cleaned up my life. I still smoke cigarettes and natural substances, but I don't drink anymore or try anything risky. That experience changed me, terrifying and life-altering in every sense. Story 34. About 10 years ago, I was dating my ex, who had very strict and extremely religious parents. The only way we could meet up privately was if she snuck out of her window late at night. Usually, I'd meet her halfway because she was always nervous. One night, she called me and said she was already on her way, which was odd since we hadn't planned to meet. But it was early in the relationship, and I was excited to see her, so I didn't question it. Then the strange things started happening. First, my cat blocked my bedroom door like it didn't want me to leave. I ignored it and went downstairs to put on my shoes. My cat kept following me, meowing nonstop. I set my keys on the shelf, put on my shoes, and when I looked back, the keys were gone. I searched everywhere, getting increasingly frustrated. The whole time, my cat was acting frantic. About 5 minutes later, she called again and said she was outside waiting. I was surprised she had made it to my house that quickly. I told her I couldn't find my keys, but that we could keep talking until I did. She quickly became impatient, then started yelling at me, demanding that I open the door. My cat was still freaking out. Her voice changed a little near the end of the call, and then she just screamed and hung up. I was stressed and confused. My cat was panicking, my keys had vanished, and my girlfriend had just screamed at me on the phone. After she hung up, I turned around, and the keys were exactly where I had left them. I opened the door and went outside looking for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Thinking she had gotten upset and left, I called her again. She picked up and I told her I had found the keys. She was confused and said she had never called me that night and hadn't even left the house. To this day, I have no idea what happened. The whole experience still haunts me. Story 35. I moved into a new house, UK, after a separation, so I was living alone. A few strange things happened, like knocking on my bedroom door in the middle of the night, waking me up. I ended up moving to the bedroom at the front of the house, and the knocking stopped. My bedroom was at the end of a short corridor, with the light switch for the upstairs lights outside my bedroom door. So I turned them off, went into my bedroom. I had blackout blinds. I distinctly remember turning off my bedroom light and using the light of the screen on my phone to find my bed because it was pitch black. I got into bed and got cozy, lying on my side trying to drift off. I'm talking maybe 10 minutes after getting in bed, I hear a loud click right outside my bedroom door. It sounded exactly like the hallway light switch. I sat up and saw light from the hallway shining through the gap at the bottom of the door. The fear I felt then is like nothing I've ever experienced before or since. I thought that can't happen on its own, but I would have heard someone. I searched the entire house, but deep down I already knew no one was there. I did the same routine again, turned off the lights and got back into bed, thinking if this happens again, I'm leaving. Thankfully, it didn't, but I still decided to move house shortly after. I still think about that click and wonder what was going on in that house. Story 36. I was 18 at the time, having just finished high school. My friends and I went to the beach on our motorcycles. 18 is the legal driving age. One of my friends had just modified his bike and suggested I take it for a spin. Stupid 18-year-old me agreed. I left my helmet behind and got on wearing only shorts and a t-shirt. It was my second time driving that particular bike, and it had no ABS. I was riding for about 10 minutes down a straight country road and decided to head back. On the way, I was going way too fast. Again, stupid 18-year-old me. I decided to overtake the car in front of me. I geared down, revved up, and just as I was about to pass, the driver suddenly started doing a U-turn with no warning. I don't remember much of my reaction. I slammed the brakes, and in that moment, I saw something like a flashback of my family's faces. I truly thought I would never see them again. Then a few seconds later, I realized I had come to a stop, just a yard or two away from the driver's door. She was staring at me with wide eyes, completely frozen. Based on my speed and how the event unfolded, I still can't explain how I didn't crash. That moment changed how I think about life. It still gives me chills every time I remember it. Story 37. September of last year, I was sleeping in the upstairs bedroom that faced the road when I was suddenly jolted awake by the sound of footsteps on gravel. I'm pretty sensitive to sounds from foxes and cats walking across the gravel driveway, leading to our back garden, so at first I was ready to dismiss it and go back to sleep. But then I realized the footsteps were unmistakably human. I checked my phone. It was 3 a.m. I got up, woke my partner, and moved into a room facing the back window to see if I could spot anyone. At that point, I was worried about my bike being stolen. It was chained to the outdoor table, but otherwise out in the open. Instead, I saw the silhouette of someone staggering in circles around the table in our back garden. They were muttering and speaking incoherently. Then this person began slamming their head and hands against the back door, making slurred sounds I couldn't understand. This woman then attacked our aviary, where we keep parrots, tearing off segments of mesh netting in an apparent attempt to get inside. It honestly looked like something straight out of a zombie movie. I was in complete disbelief. Turns out she was completely intoxicated. We called the police, who kindly escorted her off the property. She lived on the other side of town. We have no idea why she chose our house or how she ended up in our garden. It wasn't supernatural, but it was one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced, especially at that vulnerable hour of the morning. It totally unsettled me. Story 38. I don't know if this is related, but I'll share it anyway. When I was a child, I used to have the same nightmare over and over again. Every time I fell asleep, I would suddenly wake up, sitting upright like you see in the movies. My mother always slept beside me, and she would still be there when I woke up. But the dream never stopped there. I was always greeted by the same girl, sometimes by spirits with faces I can't even describe. I can still remember 3 to 4 of those dreams as clearly as if they happened yesterday. They were always the same setting, the same actions, like I was stuck in a loop or trapped in a game, forced to play through the same events every single night. The dreams felt so real. My heart would pound, and I could hear everything clearly. I could move inside the dream, but even when I realized I was dreaming, I could never force myself to wake up. I always had to finish the dream, like completing a mission. It felt like the dreams were trying to tell me something. When I moved to a foreign country for school, where my parents worked, the nightmares stopped completely. I've never had those same dreams since, but I can still picture the scenes clearly. I can still feel the fear. I don't know why they haunted me then and vanished later, but I've never forgotten them.